Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Iowa Down Ballot podcast. I am Dave Price, joined by Kathie Obradovich and Laura Belin. We need to start this week. By the way, today is Friday the 13th, and if I can do a personal point of privilege here, I was engaged on Friday the 13th.
Hey, turned out to be a lucky day for you.
Yeah. I need
Russia,
to have my wife on here and see if she would say that it was lucky for her. We'll see. I hope she still feels that way.
In Russia, it's Monday the 13th that's unlucky, not Friday the 13th.
Okay. Hey, let's begin with the veto heard round the world, or at least within our borders. I don't know that this would come as a surprise. Perhaps there are some out there who thought that somehow Governor Kim Reynolds was going to veto this complicated bill that dealt with eminent domain when it came to the carbon sequestration pipeline. I feel like, though, that, the whole process was confusing, right? Because some people probably looked at that as it was this anti-pipeline bill. It was going to save all the landowners. It was far more complex than that. Which one of you wants to begin by saying that you were shocked with the veto? Perhaps Kathie's cat.
No, yeah, Samo's joining us today. We'll see if he weighs in on any of these.
Right.
He's not surprised by much, and
Smart fella.
I felt like she could have gone either way, so I can't say I was really surprised by the veto. But the fact that she's leaving office, to me, potentially neutralized the special interest part of this, where one of her biggest donors, Bruce Brastetter, is owning Summit Carbon Solutions, and obviously their relationship goes back a long way, and so but that loyalty sometimes doesn't survive when somebody's getting ready to leave office and not running again. In this case, I think it did. Also, I think that there were some legitimate issues in the drafting of the bill that gave her, I think, an excuse to say what she said in her veto message, which is that she is concerned about landowner rights, but that she felt like this legislation would have a variety of unintended consequences, including to an ethanol producer whose pipeline project had actually signed up all of its easements without having to resort to eminent domain.
Horse is out of the barn on this, right? This would have been, perhaps this is less complicated had Summit not already received permission for eminent domain, right?
Well, they did, but on the other hand, they can't start building the pipeline until the route is approved in both North Dakota and South Dakota, and they're having real trouble in South Dakota. So I was very confident all along she would veto the bill. I was only surprised that some of the key House Republicans, like Stephen Holt, went out publicly and said that he was confident that the governor would sign. I thought that was maybe a little bit of wishful thinking to throw out there. But not only was Bruce Rastetter a big donor to her campaigns, but her mentor, Terry Branstad, to whom she owes pretty much her entire political career, is a senior policy advisor, or whatever his title is. He has some kind of a title position within Summit Carbon Solutions. So I just never saw any real possibility that she would veto the bill. I think that it was complicated. There were a couple of different bills that the House sent over to the Senate. This was the one that was really complex, that included a lot of different provisions related to pipelines and the Iowa Utilities Commission. And then there was a second bill that was very short, that was similar to what South Dakota enacted, that just would have said, you can't use eminent domain for a hazardous liquid pipeline that's carbon dioxide, basically, just a 1 or 2 paragraph bill. And that was the one that the Senate Republicans made sure not to vote out of committee, or rather Mike Busolo, the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, he kept that one bottled up in committee and then moved forward on this more complicated one that they thought they were going to be able to amend to their liking. And they ended up stuck with this House bill that, the governor raised a number of questions about it. It was very predictable that she would not come out. She's not going to come out and say, "Oh, I would never go against my big campaign donor." So she could point to other things and say, "This could affect different pipeline projects. This could affect eminent domain." And I thought, as a little bit of window dressing there, I thought it was interesting that she said in her veto message that she's instructing the Iowa Utilities Commission to enact some of the reforms that the bill would have called for, like saying that all of the commissioners have to be present at evidentiary hearings and that at least one of them has to be present for an informational meeting, which is something that a lot of the landowners were upset about.
Yeah, Utilities Commission has already sent out an order and basically announcing that they're enacting that and thanking the governor for her timely suggestion. But here's the thing. The governor was sitting up there in her office the entire legislative session, and including the past 4 years when they've been debating this bill. And I just one thing I don't understand is why she didn't make her opinion known sooner than a veto message. I mean, I think given the serious fissures in the Republican caucus that this caused, and the bad feelings and the kind of ugly debates and things that have been said that can't be unsaid, I mean, it seems like she could have headed off some of this by just saying, look, this pipeline is important to Iowa, and I'm not going to clip it, this far along into the process. And she chose not to do that. And so I do understand, and I, not to step on Dave's next question, but the really angry response that we're getting from the Republicans who were, in favor of this bill. So
I wonder, though, totally understand what you're saying, but did she not think she needed to? And by that, I mean, first of all, a couple months ago, she still thought she was running for reelection. Maybe she didn't want to touch it. But had it not been for the defiant the dozen Republican senators who decided, heck with it, we're going public with everything. We're taking this out of our closed door caucus complaints, and we're going full bore out on the Senate floor, and we're going to talk to reporters and all kinds of stuff. Did she think comfortably, though, that successfully Senate Republican leadership buried this for years, despite what House Republicans were doing? Did she think maybe she didn't have to, and they would keep making sure that this never saw the light of day? And were it not for those initially 12 Republican senators that forced the issue, maybe it wouldn't have. Had they not gone public with this, it's probably this would have never made it to the Senate floor for debate.
Yeah, there was still time, though, between the fact that between those 12 Republicans coming out and saying, look, this bill comes to the floor, we're not voting for any of the appropriations bills, and the fact of the bill coming up for a vote. So, I mean, she could have made her opinion known. That might have actually persuaded some Republicans in the Senate to vote against it, rather than take what could be a bad vote for them at some point in their political future if they want donations from Bruce Rastetter.
Oh, I think the opposite. I think it's bad for them if they voted against the bill. That's bad for their future because they could face primary challengers. But
yeah,
I,
potentially.
I agree with the premise of Dave's question, though, that there was probably a pretty good bet. I certainly didn't think that those dozen senators would hold together and be able to force this thing to the floor. I thought leadership would be able to pick off a few with promises of this or that other bill moving forward, and that the governor would never have to take any public position on this bill. So I think that could be very reasonable. But as for what's better for the legislators, I mean, man, a lot of South Dakota legislators, Republicans, lost to primary challengers because they didn't come out against eminent domain for this pipeline.
All right, now Kathie almost stole my next question, and I already had a pre-thought joke to set this up. So as a punishment, Kathie, instead of Laura, which is the way I had this set up in my mind, Kathie will have to respond. What are the percentage chances that on Thanksgiving, Kim Reynolds and Bobby Kaufman will be sharing a meal?
I think it's more likely that they will be going at each other with the cutlery. So Bobby Kaufman said in print, I think the Gazette published this quote that her agenda is essentially DOA, and he's going to do everything he can to kill every bill with her name on it. So angry is he about her veto. So. And several of the other House Republicans did make similar statements. And I totally agree with what Laura said. House Republicans are scared of the reaction, not just from potential primary challengers, but also just how the voters are going to respond to this in their districts. Um, there are some districts that are really seriously affected by pipelines. Not every district, and senators will have a little bit. Half of them have a little cushion. They don't have to run with this in their backyard in 2026. Some of them can wait 2 years or more. So I think some of these Republicans are genuinely terrified, and that's probably where we're getting some of this really heated response. But I do question, how many of them will really follow through, and does this seriously damage Kim Reynolds' chance to have any sort of meaningful legislation next year? I think it
Uh,
probably could.
it could, but I just want to say that Bobby Kaufman, I mean, he's the House Ways and Means Committee chair. He's also the son of Jeff Kaufman, the state party chair of the Iowa GOP. And he's very angry right now, but he's going to need to work with the governor to get, for instance, property tax changes through next year. That's something they won't be able to avoid some degree of collaboration on. And he's not going to bring down the entire Republican agenda because he's angry with the governor over this vote. I mean, he has been a little bit of a grandstander on this issue in general. And so, I mean, I was a little bit surprised by the tone, but I wasn't surprised that he was one of the first out there to be commenting to different media about it. But we'll see. I think that her big energy bill, I wouldn't put any money on her getting that energy bill through the legislature next year. I think she's pretty much poisoned the well on that. So you could say that LS Power, which has been fighting against that provision that benefits the electric utilities, investor-owned utilities in Iowa, Mid-American and Alliant, they were really hoping for that governor's energy bill to be passed, and I think that it's in pretty big trouble now.
I was thinking, reading and listening and watching all of the responses, particularly on the House side, how angry they were at the governor. Part of me was wondering, did you really think she was going to sign this? And maybe some of them genuinely did, I guess. So that part surprised me because I just didn't see any way that she was going to sign this based on everything we've heard and everything she has not said publicly. It just felt like all along that was the out when Republican leadership in the Senate got pushed into a corner by the dozen and then decided, all right, we've got no hope because if they're not going to support the budget, we're kind of screwed here. So they gave in, had the vote, kept trying a different few ways. It didn't happen. Democrats helped. And then I think it was 13 Republican senators in the end, wasn't it? That went for
13.
it. So they got it passed. But then they knew, I figured they knew all along that the governor was going to veto this. I've just been taken aback by how strong, not just Bobby Kaufman, but Steve Holt, and now Speaker Grassley starting the petition to get the special session, which would take 2/3 of the members, though, in both chambers to override a veto. So
Yeah.
it's not going to go anywhere in the
Not gonna
Senate.
go.
But he's still going forward with something here. I mean, he doesn't have to do that part. So how damaged is that relationship between the two of them where they've had issues for a couple of years straight on some significant issues? Does that carry over? Does everybody chill out before next January? But man, I have to wonder the governor's last year in office, what is that going to look like with these frayed feelings, and how long do these feelings last?
And the Senate Ways and Means Chair Dan Dawson was very upset at particularly one of that defiant dozen holdouts, Mark Lofgren. They got in a shouting match on the last day of the legislative session. But But Democratic State Representative J.D. Scholten raised this issue during that very last debate. Dave, you and I were up all night at the at the press bench, and they were debating that very last budget bill. And J.D. Scholten stood up and said, "How do we know that if we pass this budget, that the governor won't veto the eminent domain bill?" So I had heard a few people speculate that if they wanted to pressure her to sign it, the House
Hold
Republicans
out.
should hold out on the budget, but they didn't
Hmm.
do that.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it was just kabuki theater or if they convinced themselves somehow that she was going to sign it. I never I'm with you. To me it was always very obvious she would veto.
And then also the relationship with the 12, maybe 13, but particularly the 12, and how that works with Senate leadership if leadership remains the same in the Senate for the next legislative session. Again, many months before then, but
Oh
It
yeah.
doesn't really, to me, this doesn't add up to a really super productive election year legislative session,
Yeah.
And
despite
I
one
know
party
it's,
control.
I learned early on that the safest bet on the legislature is for them to do nothing. It is the easiest thing for them to do. But, it seems like that it might be even safer bet than normal here going into 2026.
I agree, except that they've painted themselves into a corner on this property tax thing. It's so complicated. They've made so many promises that they're going to fix it, and now they're going to I think they can't afford to come out completely empty-handed on it, and yet these relationships are so frayed. I mean, the House and the Senate Republicans didn't communicate well or get along well anyway. I heard after that eminent domain debate in the Senate, which a number of House Republicans went over to the chamber to watch. I mean, I saw House Republicans just speaking with contempt about how some of the senators had conducted themselves. I saw somebody give a big hug to the Democrat Tony Bisignano, who had stood up and given a speech calling out the Senate Republican leadership on it. I mean, so it's, I mean, that is not pretend. That's for real. There's a lot of hostility, a lot of negative feeling between those two caucuses. So I don't know, but they've got to come up with something next year on property taxes.
And of the, not to belabor this, but the top two in each chamber, the top two Republicans, will those be the same in when 2026 begins? You have Pat Grassley, the Speaker, Matt Winchittle, the House Majority Leader, and then on the Senate side, you have Jack Whitver and Amy Sinclair. Well, all of those pieces, I mean, obviously, we're all hoping that Jack Whitver's health can somehow improve with what he's battling with cancer here. So that's the most important thing. And I don't want to be dismissive of the most important part of this. But maybe more so. So hopefully that stays, he's able to continue. On the House side, but let's say that Winchell runs for Congress in the fourth. Does
Hmm.
he choose to remain as majority leader for the next session, or does he step away from that to focus more on his congressional run? So does that help with the dynamics here? Does Pat Grassley decide to run for governor? Maybe that feels less likely than Winchell running for Congress, but that's another dynamic there. And would it benefit Grassley to do both things at the same time, run for governor and keep that high profile seat in the speaker's chair?
I don't think
I
Pat he's not running for governor. I don't see it.
I agree, but also I think Matt Winchell is a stabilizing factor in the
In all
House.
of that.
He, as majority leader, really has made the trains run on time. Say what you want about his politics or his demeanor. Doesn't really love talking to the press, for example, but he is ultra organized. He knows how to move legislation. He's very efficient. I don't know to what extent he gets involved in the dynamic with the Senate, or if he's focused on his job, which is to move bills through the House. But I would say him stepping away from leadership, if he in fact would do that, might make things worse in the House.
I think that whether he stays in leadership really depends on how crowded that fourth congressional district primary is, because that's a district where the Republican primary is basically the election. I mean, the winner of the Republican primary will almost certainly be elected in November. And so he can't afford to be tied up in the House if there are three or four people really working hard and trying to run for Congress. But if he mostly clears the field, if it's Matt Winchell against a couple of people with much lower name ID, I mean, he might stay in leadership. But you can't, it seems to me that it would be very difficult to do that job of majority leader while you were running a congressional campaign if you had real competition in the primary. And that's why Jennifer Confer stepped down as House Minority Leader to focus on her run for Congress. Would really be no way to do those jobs simultaneously and do them
The
both well.
fundraising obligation alone for a leadership position in the legislature, along with trying to run for another office, would be, I would think, overwhelming.
Okay, we need to fulfill a delayed promise from last week. So thanks to both of you for helping me to do that. Last week, I teased that we were going to talk about two of the new candidates for the race for governor, one Democrat, one Republican. We got going on all kinds of stuff that was happening, shot past our pre-planned time. So we kind of did a timeout there to bring it over to this week. And I think a lot of the points will still be the same here. They're still relevant. All right, so let's start with the Democrats. So Rob Sand, the state auditor, will have a Democratic opponent, Julie Stauch. Laura, you just wrote about this, and you've talked to Julie. Julie's been around for a long time, done tons of campaigns from the operative, the strategist side, both in our state and beyond our borders, local, state, presidential. She's done tons of stuff and goes way, way back to caucus and before then even. How do you see her fitting into this? She doesn't bring the big money that Rob Sand's family brings into this. And it's non-traditional, right? I mean, she's not coming as a previous office holder. She's coming as a staffer. So what's this dynamic like?
I think this is a real challenge for her because this is not like the third congressional district primary where you have Jennifer Converse and Sarah Trone Garriott kind of starting out on basically equal footing. You've got Rob Sand, who, although he is not the governor, he is a statewide elected official. That's kind of a natural progression for people who already hold statewide office to run for governor. And so to me, it feels more like the dynamic of an incumbent versus a primary challenger. And so right now, I think Julie Stauch, the challenge for her is going to be how does she reach people beyond just the group of Democrats who don't like Rob Sand, which, there are quite a few of them, but that's not the majority of the Democratic Party. So how do you run against someone who's so much better known, whose campaign is so much better funded, and who has already won two statewide elections? I think that's what she really needs to work on. And right now, her message is she's not trying to focus on running against him. She's trying to focus on running her own race, but it's difficult because they're not starting out on even footing.
I mean, I think that the people that she has worked for in the past, including Pete Buttigieg's campaign in 2020, going back to Bill Clinton in 96, Dukakis in 88, and then more recently, Mike Franken in 2022. I mean, I do think she probably does have a national Rolodex in terms of fundraising and would be able to raise some money. I would guess, though, I mean, we all know who Julie is, but the average person, if they know her at all, they would just know her probably for being a spokesperson for Planned Parenthood of the Heartland, and that has been a while back. The other thing, I was a little bit puzzled by her announcement. I mean, she did mention some issues she's interested in: water quality and public schools and healthcare and protecting eminent domain. But she also kind of made a point of saying, putting out a resume and saying she's,
listening to her.
She's applying for a job and that she's going to go out and listen to Iowans and potentially change her focus if what she hears is, different from voters than what she's coming out with. And that strikes me as being a little bit like Christy Vilsack's campaign in the fourth district a few years back, where she didn't have a really strong Democratic agenda. She was going for kind of middle ground, and I don't think she ended up really pleasing people on either side of the aisle that way. So I'll be interested in seeing how Julie's agenda kind of evolves, and if she does, come out with some, a really strong suggestion, or at least, list of things that she would want to do as governor.
And
It
Rob
seemed
Sand hasn't talked about the water quality or reproductive rights very much. So he's certainly not emphasizing those issues. So that could potentially be an opening for her to reach Democrats who care about them.
the way she's launched early to me strikes me as a difficult balance in that you are trying to show that you're receptive to people, like Kathie stole my thunder with Christy Vilsack. That's immediately who I thought of when I was listening to all of this. And it was also challenging because Christy Vilsack didn't live in the district. So that was a whole thing. She had to deal with answering questions about that too. But so you want to be receptive and show that you're receptive. And I'm out there listening to you, what's on your mind, all that kind of stuff. But then the balance is you're also running for essentially CEO of the state. And so people want to know your vision and your leadership skills and all of that. So it's unique to me about the approach. It just seems really challenging to figure out how to make that case and make that balance to people.
I want to mention for people who may not remember the context that in 2012, after the redistricting, Iowa, what was then the second district covering most of southeast Iowa, was like a perfect district for Christy Vilsack, who grew up in Mount Pleasant. I mean, and Dave Loebsack and Bruce Braley were both in the first district. So Dave Loebsack actually had to move to Johnson County to be in the second district. So I thought Christy Vilsack would run for Congress there. I thought she had a really good chance of beating Loebsack in a primary, and she would have absolutely been elected at that time. But instead, she didn't want to challenge Loebsack in that primary. And so she moved to Ames, Story County, which was part of the fourth district, so that she could run against Steve King, which to me just seemed like a suicide mission. I was very surprised that she did that. So in any case, she was not successful in running against Steve King in 2012. But that was the reference for people who may not have been following Iowa politics then.
I wonder then, does that put increased pressure on Julie quickly, to Kathie's point about she may have a national Rolodex as she has raised money for others? Does she then, and I guess I'm thinking a little bit of Deidre DeGier, totally different situation, but Deidre did not raise a ton of money early on, and then it seems like that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, that then some of the check writers are looking at it like, well, she doesn't have a lot. This may not be a good investment for us. And then she was really, really outspent. So does that raise the pressure on Julie to use the connection she has? And while she's not going to be able to match what Rob did early, at least, you wouldn't think, she has to show something to show that she's competitive here. Otherwise, she's kind of in a bind.
Well, they don't have to release any fundraising numbers until next January. So,
yeah, that's a good point.
She can announce whatever she has raised, but I mean, I think it's going to be difficult. I felt like it was a little bit of a passive aggressive move for the Rob Sand campaign to come out with a Pete Buttigieg endorsement right after Sand announced, before Julie Stouch announced. But to have Pete Buttigieg out there publicly saying he supports Rob Sand for governor, and Julie was his political director before the 2020 caucuses, so obviously he worked closely with her. So I don't know how well the national network is going to come through for the fundraising.
Okay, let's switch to the Republicans. Eddie Andrews, state representative from Johnston. During the legislative session before it ended, he was talking about that possibility. One thing that really struck me during his announcement speech was that he said this out loud, that he didn't identify the person, but he had said that he had been during the session talking to somebody, this unnamed person, and they prayed about the idea of Eddie Andrews running for governor. At the time, Kim Reynolds was still officially running. Thought it was an interesting story to say publicly to begin with. But where does he fit into all of this? And does he really try to lean in? I feel like somebody in this race is going to lean in hard to the pipeline now. Maybe I'm going to be wrong about this because Feenstra is not going to do this. I mean, he's not going to go against the pipeline. And, has not been super strong and specific when he's talked about it. So that would seem to open a lane for somebody to go full in a primary to be like, I'm against all this. We're going to stop this, blah, 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 blah. And Eddie's talked about it a little bit. It's sort of not he's not in the right part of the state where it directly impacts him since he's in the Des Moines Metro. But does he embrace this? And is he the one to charge forward, or is there another path for somebody else to get in?
Brad Sherman's already doing it. He's been talking about it for months, and he's got probably at least half a dozen of those legislators who really push for that bill have already endorsed Brad Sherman before Eddie Andrews even got into the race. So I'm not sure. I mean, Eddie Andrews hasn't been a huge fundraiser. I don't know how he's going to be able to compete in a statewide primary. I thought the most interesting thing that he said was that some unnamed group supposedly had committed to spend
big check
7 figures on his behalf, which I couldn't tell if he meant as an independent expenditure or what he was talking about. I don't know who that would be. But even, $1 million, that sounds like a lot. But honestly, he's going to be competing against people in the primary who are going to spend well over $1 million. So I'm not sure how it's going to work for him.
You've got a candidate from suburban Des Moines who also would be running against Mike Buslow, who's also from the suburban Des Moines area. Andrews was very narrowly reelected in Johnston. He's got a Johnston, sort of Urbandale, Saylorville, so sort of north suburbs, just north of Des Moines. He only won with 51%. So I thought that was interesting. One of the things he kind of takes credit for is trying to work on the mental health workforce in the state, trying to expand psychiatric residencies in the state, which I think, that's a great accomplishment to mention. I think the governor kind of could take a lot of credit for that as well. But I think, when you think about Eddie Andrews, if he hadn't mentioned that, I would have probably had a hard time coming up with a big signature, piece of legislation that he's accomplished while he's been in the legislature. And, if he hadn't been sort of talking a little bit about running for governor before the session ended, I would have been saying, okay, I'll take candidates we didn't see coming for 200 days.
One thing he didn't mention in his announcement was that he was one of the House Republicans who voted against the area education agencies bill. And I don't think that that's something that he'll probably want to highlight in the campaign, but that might be a way that he could set himself apart from the others in the field. I don't think that those changes are popular. I think they're going to really negatively affect especially rural schools, and that in that sense of I'm someone who's not afraid to stand up to my own party, which is something we hear occasionally from candidates. I feel like that could be an issue, but I don't think that he will mention that issue. But it to me, it's something that stands out about him. They did try to make an electability argument for him at his launch event. I mean, he is the only Republican legislator to win a district that Biden carried, and also the only one to win a district that Kamala Harris carried. So I don't completely discount that, but as Kathie mentioned, it's not like he won by some overwhelming margin.
All right, let's take us over the finish line. Laura, I know there's one other thing you wanted to bring up before we wrap.
I'm working on something, hope to publish it this weekend, just about the math. I really
want to... You can't hope to publish it. You're teasing it now. You got to come through.
I'm committed to it. Okay, I'm committed to it.
Because we always come through with things we tease, Dave.
Yeah, seriously. Maybe a week later, but we come through.
I talked to a lot of people about how Fred Hubbell only lost the 2018 governor's race by about 36,000 votes. And that year was pretty good midterm for Democrats. They flipped 2 congressional districts in Iowa. And so I hear people say, oh, it's another Trump midterm. And so I'm going to really focus on how hard the math is for Democrats in 2026 in Iowa. The situation, the Republican voter registration advantage is way, way more than it was in 2018. And the Republican turnout advantage is really significant. So I'm going to really try to dig into those numbers and look at different scenarios for different levels of turnout. I just don't know if the numbers are there right now for Democrats to win any of the statewide races, including the U.S. Senate race. So that's going to be the focus of my piece.
Kathy, anything you want to tee up?
I think I'm just going to make plans to read Laura's piece this weekend. Yeah, I think now that you've asked me, my mind is completely blank on what we're working on. So I'll just
a mystery's okay too.
Yeah, tell everybody to read Laura's.
We'll all come through with something. We always do. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
You too.
And thank you all for supporting the Iowa Writers Collaborative. Thank you for supporting all the individual writers. Please share the work, subscribe if you can, become a financial supporter if you can. If you like this podcast, please like and share it to a gazillion of your friends. And if you're able to become a financial supporter to pay the bills for this production as well, that is always appreciated. Thank you for joining us for the conversation this week, and we will talk to you again next week.